Hello and welcome to the tier list. Dayman here. Today we're going to be talking about the mythical weapons. It can be quite vexing to determine what order to pick them up and why you would pick them up and which ones are better than others. Of course, when it comes to your playstyle, that is an entirely preferential thing. So I'm not here to tell you that just because a weapon that you like is bad that you shouldn't pick it up. And I'll try to remove as much bias as I can, but we all know that the spear is my sweet baby boy. We're going to quickly discuss the overview of what these weapons what these tiers mean. However, before I do that, I'm going to at least show us what the general consensus for these weapons are. These will not be my final tier listings, but they are what I think people consider to be true for these weapons. I know they're all going to the S tier, but don't worry, we're going to start to see some drop off here. Oh, it pains me. It pains me. Oh, it hurts. I can't do it. People have said it's the worst, so I'll give it its credence. Okay. This is what the general public views the tier listing to be for our mythical weapons. There are arguments to be had that this is the most accurate, but I frankly do not find it to be so, and with some thorough playtesting, that is not what I find. So, what does it mean to be an S tier mythical weapon? This means that it outclasses all other mythical weapons. It outplays its non-mythical variant. Not only that, but even if you're not good with the weapon, you are going to get the most out of it. A is very similar that, yes, it will outclass its non-mythical variant. However, it's perhaps not outpacing all mythical weapons, obviously not being an S tier. Not only that, but you might run into some handling issues, especially if you're not familiar with the weapon, and that becomes even more evident in the B tier. In the B tier, it requires familiarity with the weapon to make the most out of it. There are some edge cases to where it might be on par with their non-mythical variants. And in the C tier, this is where we're running into bugs, issues with the handling. It might have utility, but ultimately it's not going to fill your preference unless it is your favorite weapon variety, in which case, sure, pick it up. When we get into the D tier, this is where you find that these weapons don't handle as you want or as intended. Their non-mythical variants are perhaps better than them, and frankly, the feeling of picking the weapon will leave you wanting. So, let us get into my tier list. Again, all tier lists are preferential, but I will make a case for every pick. Now, I'll tell you what weapon's not moving, and that's going to be our Dagger. The Dagger is a phenomenal choice. Yes, it can stick into enemies, reducing the amount of throws you can get during a charge. But that is by design of the game. And it outclasses the non-mythical Dagger by virtue of the fact you can recall the Dagger while still sending 2 blades forward to attack for you, mitigating that sticking that is quite frustrating for many of the bladed weapon types. I've literally never seen anyone regret picking up the Dagger. Maybe they say, yeah, it kind of got stuck on the floor, but there's no true regret. Now, many people will say the bow is the best mythical weapon. The best. And I was going to put it in the A tier until I saw it in practice and I discussed with some experienced players. And here's the thing. You do not need to be good at archery within Dungeons of Eternity to get the most out of your mythical bow. In fact, you can treat it like a grenade launcher or missile launcher. You can keep your standard side weapon loadout, but you can simply pull it out when you're ready, charge it up, and throw out huge explosions all around you. However, this is where we will see it drop into the A tier. Why? How dare I put this amazing weapon in A tier? And that is because you want to be using a bow as a bow, and it will not fit everybody's playstyle. It might be awesome to get that 10-second blast period every 10 seconds, and hey, that is great utility, but you still want your bow to feel like a bow. Not only that, but there are cases where you would prefer an ice bow over a mythical bow, as it will have utility quite often where you have to rely on that charge period if you're not good at it. Now, I think that A tier for our side sword is a very appropriate place for it to be. However, there's something to discuss with it here. Now, the side sword, it has one glaring issue. And its glaring issue also plays into its strengths. And that is the charge beam can end up colliding with your allies or hard structures, destroying the chance of it making contact. However, its auto-targeting, as well as its large blade, are quite useful in open arenas. However, the issue here is that you can end up clipping your ally who is in a fight on a target you're trying to strike down at distance to aid them, and end up not getting that utility you're looking for. Now, as a side sword, it's great. However, I think a lot of us enjoy the elements present on a side sword. I know that the fire element is one that I find to be amazing on the side sword. However, this is an excellent weapon, but I think it's on par with its non-mythical variant, simply because that charge period is finicky and it can get matched by an appropriate side sword of a non-mythical variety. Let's shoot back up to our Greatsword. Some honorable mentions about this Greatsword are that it is the most versatile in the amount of perks you can select on it. Not only that, but it has the highest damage threshold, only matched by maybe one other. And it is just chef's kiss if you love the Greatsword. However, for some reason, it is not the longest Greatsword available to you, and those extra inches are a notable factor when dealing with bosses like the skeletal boss. Its charge period is also something to take into note. It is a one and done, meaning that once you charge it up and you strike the floor, you're only going to get that single use out of it. And if you are used to or have that intuition that wherever direction you strike the weapon is going to send the spikes, that will not be true. Now, there's actually utility here in that you can send the spikes in the direction that your head is facing. So you can strike in front of you and send spikes to your side. And that's really cool. But getting those spikes to line up on your enemies takes time and practice. And for that, I find that despite all of its strengths, a non-mythical Greatsword will somewhat match its playstyle. And that one-and-done attack, though it can be quite useful, and you can consolidate single target damage by hitting them into a wall and spiking them there, I think that that is a niche case and doesn't really put it above a standard Greatsword. Now, another weapon that I feel is appropriately tiered is going to be our mythical hammer. You do not need to be good with a hammer. You don't even need to use it like a hammer. And the crazy thing about this thing is that it has the shortest cooldown of all other mythical weapons, which is standard 10 seconds. But for some reason, this thing cools down in 5 seconds, which, until that gets patched, I don't think that this thing is outmatched by any hammer other than it. You can hold in the hammer's head. You can hold it anywhere you want. And man, this thing is just golden. It even outclasses weapons that try to do what it does, as in knockback. That explosive radius can be triggered on your own hand, on one of your weapons, on the floor, as well as being activated when thrown. Now, I'll tell you what, that is something that makes this thing a massive standout. Frankly, it's above the Dagger. Now, I'm not going to be ordering these in their actual order, but that is a notable point. Now, the Crossbow. I had incredibly high hopes for the Crossbow, so maybe it was a bias on my behalf of my own disappointment, but I expected a greater reload than is the standard crossbow. The fact that it is an 8-shot crossbow with a limited magazine during its charge period, while being only 4 shots, while also having the same collision issues that we find in the blade that is bladed projectile of our longsword, being that it can collide with allies and structures. I don't know. The last thing here is having a tertiary element, or having a basically tertiary perk being an element on a crossbow, being slowing, ice, and fire with criticals. Boy, oh boy. The crossbow on its non-mythical variety truly outclasses its mythical variant by the virtue of the fact that you can get elements, and that that charge period when you do load up your crossbow only gives you 4 shots as opposed to a total of 8, which is quite disappointing. And I just think that it needs some reworking if it's going to outclass the standard crossbow. Now, here it's quite buddy-buddy with the axe right now. The axe has some serious handling issues. It has a tendency to get stuck in enemies, which is by design, but what is not by design is that it does not just stick into any old weapon. You would expect that when you charge it and you throw it, and it makes its contact where it starts to buzzsaw for a short period of time, causing a continuous hit and stagger to be its primary feature. But, unfortunately, the axe ends up glancing off of targets, even while they're still alive. It can't even stagger the Uber Mage from preventing it from teleporting. Now, another huge disadvantage of the axe is that when you throw it, is the only time by which you can activate that buzzsaw ability, meaning it is relegated to being a thrown weapon only, where I know me and others quite enjoy using it as a melee weapon. And when it's in its charge period and you hit a target with it, even on accident, it'll dissipate the entire charge and you have to wait another 10 seconds. Not only this, but its charge period is, on average, the 10-second period that we find in most weapons. So when you throw it and it does make contact and it does its buzzsaw, you'll be lucky to be able to recall it in time for a secondary buzzsaw, meaning it feels like a one and done despite it having the chance to get more than one shot off. And let's just quickly revisit the longsword to mention that even though it has as many strikes as you can get into it while it's for its bladed weapons, it's typically 5. I know you can get 6, you might get 7, you have to try to get 7, where you can really unload tons of arrows much more frequently than you can with any of these other weapons. That even includes the dagger for its charge period. So for that, I think we have our first truly tiered D tier weapon. Now, if you like the weapon, if you like the axe, you might stick with it. But it's already a niche pick for most people's loadouts. So kind of being outclassed, as in a thrown weapon, by the dagger, even by the javelin or spear. So let's talk about it. The spear. It's my sweet baby boy, and I cannot stand to see it in the D tier any longer. Many people would argue with me, now I wouldn't say many, but there are a few people who would argue with me that this is where the spear belongs, because its handling is a bit different than its regular variant. Do I find that to be that great of a disadvantage? Not truly, because if you are used to using a spear as intended, mind you, nobody's using a greatsword in one hand. You're just not doing it unless you're, doing something else with your offhand. When you're in a fight, it's two hands on. That is also true for our spear. I don't know how, and yes, there are some spear variants that are shorter that you can use in one hand in real life, but I find that unless you're using a shield in your offhand, just to kind of keep space on your character, the spear needs to have two hands on. And here is the other major misconception. If you're using a spear in two hands, you're going to take your offhand, whether, for me that's my left hand, I'm going to turn my offhand on the bottom of the spear beneath my primary hand. That's going to increase the handling and the speed by which it can attack, while also eliminating one of its major disadvantages in its handling and the fact that it can get dislodged, as many bladed weapons can. Now, I know that the fire spray, its primary charge feature, is incredibly underwhelming. Frankly, the shield does slightly better at destroying certain enemy types of the common variety, that is. But I have not found that there is a bad matchup with the spear. And I'll say this. Most of these weapons have at least one bad matchup. The spear is good against every enemy type at any range. And I know that people will say that, well, a spear is really bad in a close range fight and enemies can spawn behind you or they tend to run up on you. If you take that charged attack, the fire spray, and shoot it at your feet, it will stagger enemies around you, allowing you to escape and get into a comfortable range, which makes it outclass a standard spear for its handling in that regard. Another important note here is that fire spray is a strategic placement tool, very similar to a shield's knockback or a greatsword's knockback, or an area damage or explosions present on hammers and axes respectively. It is a means by which you can keep enemies at bay. And you can charge this attack, and if you see 3 to 5 enemies charging at your archer or another ally who might be low, you can take off those charged attacks and cause them to stagger in place, even stepping back a half step, meaning you can control where your enemies are, filter feeding them into your allies, even your melee allies, in order for them to manage those fights much easier. And for that, it is just an amazing supportive tool. And if you're like me and enjoy solo play, then being able to stagger enemies approaching you to keep the fight at your pace is just great. Now, a disadvantage to it is if an enemy is touching the head of your spear, it will not be affected by the fire spray. But as we kind of discussed with another weapon that had that kind of same feature where it's not as close, it can kind of like beam through things, I find that that's almost an advantage. I can chip away with the head of my spear while attacking enemies behind it, which is more useful, I think, than trying to rely on that it getting caught up on an enemy in front of you. So I think that the spear is the best mythical weapon, but that's a preference, and you're not here for my preferences. You're here for a relatively non-biased view of the weapons. Now, if I feel like I'm giving it its day in the sun here, it's a B tier weapon, but because it has a steeper learning curve than the Greatsword, due to the fact that it does not handle like a regular spear, and by that, Obi-Wan Pierogi has an excellent video demonstrating this weird swaying effect and this drop off that you don't really find inside of the regular spear. But let me give you my edge case for it being a B tier weapon. That is that it has a hidden feature. Now, a few of these weapons have hidden features, but this one is special. It is a heat-seeking missile. While fully charged, it will defy physics. It will bend through the air and auto-target enemies, hitting them in their hitboxes, most often the head, but Doomer and Wasp, it hits them in the belly, but whatever. So, Skeletal Boss can dodge out of the way of strikes. Lots of Skeletal Warriors, including Imps, will dodge, roll, or step to the side. And the Wasp has this really jaggedy effect that makes it very difficult to get ranged thrown weapon attacks against it. This charged spear can be thrown multiple times during its charge period and will always hit an enemy. Now, if you're not throwing right, you're going to miss, but if you're throwing right, it's going to hit. Now, for that, I find that its consistency is outmatched, its versatility is outmatched, and when you are using it as a supportive tool as opposed to a killing tool, you're going to have a great time with it. However, I still cannot justify a B tier. It is a preferential weapon, making it a C. Now, here's the thing about the shield. It is in its display screen when you're prestiging. They're showing it bashing down enemies with this thrown attack, destroying them instantly. And it makes you feel like this is going to be a fourth weapon. If you're using the Juggernaut perk, now you can have 4 weapons on your person. Wow, now that feels pretty cool. The only build that will allow you to do that. Nope. No way. No way, Jose. Okay. The damage of this shield is on par with a regular shield when it's not in its uncharged state. When it's not charged, it does 1 damage just like a regular shield. Not only that, I mean, it does the same amount of damage as hitting someone with a potion, guys. Come on. Now, when it's in its charge period, it appears to do the minimal damage threshold that is available to weapons. Based off my testing, that's kind of what I found, and even then, I think it's actually lower. But when we're looking at this weapon, it's not a weapon. Therefore, it's obviously not going to deal damage the way you expect it to. But if you're like me and you've ever been actually shield bashed, oh boy, yeah, it'll get you. And we've seen even Captain America's shield take someone out, right? This thing has spikes on it, a metal edge. This thing should deal damage. Now, all right. Let's talk about what it actually does. And this thing doesn't belong in the D tier. It doesn't. I wish it did. It is such a disappointing child that I wish it was a D tier. But it is better than a regular shield for one reason and one reason only. And that is that it has the knockback feature on at all times while you are holding it. If an enemy strikes against your shield, they won't just be stopped, they will be thrown back. And with a bit of experience with this shield, it has surprised me at how often I rely on that easy knockback without having to do my swinging of an arm, which can be somewhat finicky on a regular shield. Not only that, during its charge period, that knockback present against enemies striking against it is even greater. So that's quite cool. Now the next thing is, the thrown weapon, its targeting is a bit finicky. There are many times where I've tried to throw the weapon at incoming enemies to keep them back while I'm fighting the enemy in front of me, and it'll hit the wave in front of me as opposed to a wave approaching. And that doesn't feel good. Its return, when it recalls to your hand after the bounce back, can be so satisfying when you catch it. But that's if you catch it. It doesn't fly back to your hand or even your back. It flies behind you, and if it just recalled immediately, you'd get the 1 second or so respawn, but it becomes like 2, almost 3 seconds at times, depending how far you've thrown it or how far it bounces, meaning you're without a shield. You will lose your defensive tool trying to use it defensively. Yeah. And the reason it doesn't match its non-variant component is because, or its non-variant counterpart, is because a regular shield has elemental damage. A poison shield allows you to swipe through a crowd and ends up dealing poison, keeling them over for seconds at a time. A poison ice shield can allow you to freeze an enemy, and then you could actually destroy that enemy, making it a better killing weapon than even its thrown option on the mythical. And the additional fire damage that causes explosions allows you to get a free knockback, quite similar to the auto knockback, though it's only a chance. So I think an elemental shield with absorb and knockback is going to be on par with the heck. You can take a regular shield. I would never say put attacking weapon perks on a shield. It's always absorb and knockback, but you don't even need knockback on a shield if you want to be able to adequately place your enemies, as in to knock them into a pit without knocking them over that pit. So there's that. Now, is it fun? Oh yeah, I think all of these mythical weapons are fun. I have a little less fun with the axe. I'll be honest, I have a little less fun with the axe because there are times where I want it to hit, and if it strikes against an enemy's weapon or strikes against their armor, it doesn't always stick into that buzzsaw, and it's frustrating. So all these weapons you're going to have fun with, especially the shield. The shield is incredibly fun, but it's not where you want it to be. So I know all you thought I was going to put that shield in the D tier, but frankly, I think the mythical axe is the greatest letdown. And the greatest weapon that I've found is our hammer. If you have arguments for these weapons having a different placement, please leave it in the comments. I love to hear from the community. I know that some people already disagree with this placement, but based off of a very deep dive discussing with everyone that I can with these weapons, seeing them in actual play, this is where they belong. Remember to disinfect your face mask and wash your face. Dayman out. Peace.